Once again, oh God, we thank you for all these wonderful things you've given us. Thank you for this day. We could go on and on and on thanking you for all the wonderful things you've given us, oh God. I say, I ask this in your Son's name, Jesus, oh God. Thank you for everything.
My name is Ella Pace, and I am married to Michael Pace, who is the MC, who is the great-great-grandson of Chief Anderson, whom the town of Anderson was named after. And so he has a lot of the history, more so than me, okay? But we live in Oklahoma today. But along the White River up here, there was a lot of Delaware villages, Stringtown, and a lot of different little villages along the rivers here. That the Delaware were here for about 25 years, settled along here. Now, Mike's mom is full-blood Indian, and I kind of wanted to talk to you a little bit about the dress that I have on today. Back then, you would have seen, first of all, before the Europeans came, they wore hides and different cloths. I mean, different, what do I want to say, flax and different things they made clothes out of. And then when the Europeans came, they liked the materials and the bright colors that they had. So therefore, we have these clothes to represent that when the Europeans came. So I always want to tell you a little about my dress that I have on. It is a Delaware traditional dress. It's like your Sunday meeting dress, I'll put it that way. It's your dress-up dress when you're a Delaware. And it's a wrap, and you can tell you could have told a Delaware lady back then, because this is the way she would have looked. In a wraparound skirt with the wide ribbon work down the side, and then this blouse. They like this blouse. This is kind of a pattern after the Dutch that came over with the big collar. You can see the big collar, and they decorated it the way they wanted to. Also, we have what we call the Tulip Purse, and it's also represents the tulip because they like the tulip bulb so well. So it's six-sided like a tulip, and then it's lined inside with the red that you can see. Also, I wanted to make note that this ribbon work was Mike's mom's ribbon work, and she's since passed away. But I took it and put it on a dress that I could wear. So I feel like that Ma, we always called her Ma, that Ma is always with us when we dance. So that's a good thing. And then we always carry our fans, and we invented the air conditioner. Y'all didn't know that, did you? So anyway, we have our fans, our Eagle fans, and then we have our shawl to keep us warm. So if it gets cold, we can put our shawl on. Oh, and another thing, this is called a soup allowance. This in the back. And back when there were having the wars and whatever, when the Delawares would come, they would go like this, letting them know that it was the Delaware. And that was because of the soup allowance. But anyway, the Delawares were here for about 25 years, and what else? Let me think what else I can say that would be of history that I can remember, because Mike is really good with the history, since he's the Delaware and I'm the wife, and so I'm an adopted Delaware. That's the way it works. He's from the Turtle Clan, and so somebody gave me this turtle ring today. I thought that was quite appropriate.
I was born here in Broad Ripple, Indiana, in the old part, which was not connected to Indianapolis at that time. Had no sewers, no indoor plumbing, no anything. We were river rats and the poorest people around. My great-grandmother was born up in the Dakotas. Her name was Quinella Baston. She was married to a French worker, not some officer or any fancy thing like that you see in the movies. Quinella was married to a French worker at Bozeman, Montana, who worked at the fort by the name of Bastain at the time. They called it Baston later. And somehow she ended up down in Kentucky. Don't know how, but with a name like Quinella, and since her relatives were known horse traders and breeders and loved racehorses, I think she was won in a horse race, and that's how she ended up down there, which wouldn't be unusual for an Indian woman to be taken down out of her homeland and moved into somewhere down here in Indiana. It's very uncommon. In fact, there's another lady walking around here. She's got an unusual heritage, and she doesn't know how her great-grandmother ended up down in southern Indiana either. So that's on my dad's side. On my mother's side, and so my dad's he comes from the Blackfeet people. Blackfeet spanned Canada and the U.S., and under the Jay Treaty that drew the line between Canada and the U.S., the Blackfeet people to this day are supposed to be able to go across the line unmolested as part of that treaty, because it was their heritage, their line, their territory. That's my dad's side. My mother's side comes from Virginia. And her tribe, the Powhatan tribe. You probably know Powhatan from that famous Disney movie, Pocahontas and all that kind of fakey story, but there really was a Pocahontas, and she died in England and had one son who returned, and their son was by John Rolfe, not John Smith. A fellow named John Rolfe, an Englishman, and it was a marriage, we're pretty sure, of convenience for economic reasons, because the Rolfe family founded one of the big tobacco combines in Virginia. The English loved the Virginia tobacco. Their own was really harsh that they got from the islands, and they loved having that Virginia tobacco. And so it's from that family and so forth that my mother was descended. And about 1850, they did a calculation that from that family, there were 250,000 people living in the United States who were descended from the Powhatan tribe at that time. There's more now. Now, the bottom line is, I only visited the Blackfeet people once after World War II when my dad came back, and we traveled around to a lot of reservations and a lot of old places that he knew. We went there once. They were so terribly poor that it made us look rich. And I don't think my parents could stand going back again. And they felt so sad, and it was. I remember as a kid, I was 6 years old before I saw my dad again after 6 years in the military. And I could tell at age 6, something was wrong. It just wasn't right. We went once to my mother's folks, what's left of them, once 10,000 people. Small village of about 1,000 people now, fishermen, small farmers, largely intermarried with black folk and Caucasian folk, and they farm, they fish out of the river, and they too had very little. So made us appreciate more what we had in our little neck of the woods over in old Broad Ripple. So I grew up not really with either one of my heritages that they want me to come here and talk about. I grew up instead because my parents took me to Oklahoma, to God's country, where there are, instead of no federally recognized tribes here in Indiana, even today, even though I'm wearing a vest of a Miami man's leggings, same design, from 1830, because the Miamis were very prevalent here, and the Delawares, and all those other people you hear Ella and Mike talk about. The Delawares were through here. There were at one point, I think somebody counted 27 different tribes in Indiana that came through here. But I got related to the people in Oklahoma. I was taken in by a Kiowa family. I've become friends and family with some of the Delaware people. And I have a great many relatives now through extended families. Because in my realm, in my heritage, my bloodlines run somewhere else, and somewhere else that I've only visited once. So it has a lot to do with where you're raised and what traditions you're raised with. And mine ended up being Oklahoma traditions, even though among the 39 tribes today in Oklahoma, the Delawares being one, there's a lot of different traditions, very complex traditions. Traditions about food, traditions about that some still practice, about talking or not talking to your in-laws, about what you wear at certain times, how you dance, what you wear when you dance, and so on and so forth. It's all very, very complex. And coming to a single place and expecting to see Indians, which is, of course, a name somebody else put on, 500 different groups, it's a misnomer. And it doesn't do justice to the people that it represents. So what I would say to you is, if you really want to know Indian culture, I would think of it as Indian cultures. And there's nothing wrong with studying and being with somebody from one and really learning to appreciate it in the way of having a lot of empathy, not sympathy for people. Indian people are very happy about who they are. They look at the countryside to now and say, hey, this is our land, and that's why we fight in the military, the same military that it was used to oppress us. We'll go to battle. We'll protect that land. we're pleased to be here now. But we remember our heritage and remember our ancestors, and we don't forget. So my suggestion is, as a man standing here of mixed heritage, yes, I claim bloodlines, and I claim some heritage through my extended families. But I don't claim to know about what all Indians are about.
When they moved west, the Delawares had allotments in Oklahoma and Kansas maybe, but mostly Oklahoma, that the government gave them so much land. And the fact that now like Mike's aunt, she had an allotment. They gave him back. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah. But anyway, his aunt was 8 years old, and she had this allotment. Now, her mom and dad's allotment might have been several miles away, and maybe her grandparents. And I said, well, why didn't they put them together? They didn't want them together. They wanted them separated. And so that's what happened. And I said, well, why wasn't she raised by her parents? Well, they were so busy that she was raised by her grandparents. His aunt was. And now this isn't about Anderson, though, but a little story about his aunt. Frank Phillips and the Phillips brothers were drilling oil wells in Oklahoma. You've heard of Phillips Petroleum, okay? They drilled and they could not get a well. So they went to her allotment and said, can we drill a well? They drilled a well on her allotment. It was a gusher. That's how Phillips Petroleum started, was right there on her allotment. They did 9 more and got gushers on that. So that's how Phillips Petroleum started, was because of her allotment in Oklahoma. Oh, yeah. She was a rich little Indian lady. She could come in. Frank Phillips said, anytime you come to town, if you need anything, I don't care if I'm in a meeting, you come right in, and I'll take care of it. So, yeah, they were good to her. Yeah.
Can I say something?
Sure.
It's an interesting thing about oil and minerals and all those things that were found under Indian land, which was Indian land, but by that time had been taken over by white folks. One of the most interesting is in Oklahoma, in the very area Ella's talking about, the north part, which was rich in oil under the surface. And once oil was discovered under land that was Indian land, a lot of white guys wanted to marry Indian women because they had rights. They had what were called head rights to money to be paid to them because they had found oil under their land. And so a lot of guys sought out Indian women and married them. Mysteriously, a lot of Indian women died around that time. And in fact, there's a well-known book called The Two Deaths of Sybil Bolton. And a prize-winning New York writer from the New York Times was studying his grandmother's death in Oklahoma, and he found out she had died twice. And he couldn't figure out what that meant and how. And he wrote a book about it because she had died twice. She had literally been shown on tribal rolls and the local rolls as dying 2 times so that 2 different husbands could get the rights to her money coming in. Now, those things didn't happen. Why didn't they happen in Indiana or Illinois or Ohio? Those states were simply a conduit for the people being pushed constantly to move further and further west. And when they finally eradicated the tribal presence as a main group out of Georgia and the Carolinas and so forth, and pushed them up and out west. The so-called Trail of Tears you may have already heard about sometime. In the north, a lot of people were being pushed out of the northeast and further west, and that's why through Indiana the Delawares were here for a while, and eventually right in this area, even though they were intermarried with some of the white folks, even though they were traders, even though they became good citizens, didn't make any difference. Sooner or later, their tribe was pushed out of their land. Their presence was pushed west of the Mississippi. Thomas Jefferson once said or wrote, no tribe or no white man will ever want to live west of the Mississippi. So let's just push everybody over there. We don't know what to do with them. By 1838, it started en masse, and there's a whole series of writings about the first three Supreme Court decisions were about Indian presence on the land, about people being moved. But you never had reservations in Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, because it was a constant moving, pushing people out of the way, getting them off the land people wanted to farm, wanted to have, wanted to build. And the railroads, of course, around the beginning, just before the Civil War, were starting to move across the Trans-Mississippi West. So there was never any rest. Imagine your house today. If you lived in your house for a year and then were told you had to leave that house and move miles and miles away to a place you'd never seen, never heard of. And then you got there, and it wasn't very long before you had to leave again. Constant moving. Now, Washington sent 5,000 troops to Ohio, which was a terribly forbidding place. It was known as a place where you went into Ohio territory and you didn't come out. Indians controlled it for a long time. And Washington was trying to get the valley cleared out, the Ohio Valley cleared out of tribes. And all those tribes that Ellis talked about that passed through here, pushed them out of here. They were trying to rid Chicago of the Indians. By 1838, the government declared Chicago was free of Indian influence. Wasn't true. We found the 1840 census showing Indians living about where O'Hare Airport is today. But they somehow overlooked them and declared to everybody else Indians were gone. It was safe to come live in Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio. But Washington's troops didn't fare very well. It took 5,000. He lost all 5,000 trying to get through Ohio just to get into the valley and clear it out. That's the kind of pressures on tribes here. That's one of the reasons, only one, that you don't have reservations in Indiana, Illinois,